Lonely Cowboy thought his dog was gone, but it returned, leading a lost Apache widow. Ethan Cole had stopped believing. In returns the day his dog vanished, into the tall grass without a sound, leaving behind nothing but a broken rope and the empty echo of paws that never came back. And in the weeks that followed, he told himself a man who lived alone in the middle of nowhere could not afford hope, because hope made the nights heavier and the memories louder. So he buried himself in routine as if repetition could silence grief, fixing fence posts that did not need fixing, cleaning the same rifle again and again until the metal felt colder than his hands, and speaking out loud to empty rooms as if the walls still listened. The dog had not just been an animal. It had been the last living thing that chose him without condition, the last reminder that something in the world still stayed. People had drifted out of his life like dust through open fingers. The small town had moved on without him, and even the land seemed tired of his footsteps. But the dog had stayed until the day it didn't. For 3 days, Ethan searched without sleep, calling until his voice cracked, following tracks that vanished into rock and dry soil, chasing shadows of movement that turned into nothing, until finally he stood alone, beneath a wide sky, and accepted that nothing was coming back. After that, he returned to his shack and closed the door, not only against the world, but against expectation itself. Time passed in the strange, hollow way it does when loneliness becomes routine and silence feels permanent. On the morning everything changed, Ethan was bending over a cracked leather strap at his workbench when a faint sound reached his ears. A scrape near the doorway so familiar that his heart rejected it before his mind could, and yet his body moved on instinct before doubt could catch up. When he pulled the door open, the world shifted because the dog stood there, real and breathing, thinner, dirt-streaked, older somehow but unmistakably alive. For a long moment neither of them moved, as if motion itself might shatter the truth of it. Then the dog took a slow step forward and Ethan dropped to one knee, hands shaking as they buried into warm fur, a breath tearing from his chest that sounded like a man being pulled back from drowning. He pressed his forehead to the dog's head, whispering the name he had never truly stopped carrying. And the silence that had haunted him for weeks finally broke apart. But the reunion did not stay whole for long, because the dog stiffened suddenly and turned its head toward the open land, its body shifting from relief to urgency as if something else waited beyond the doorway. Ethan followed the line of its gaze into the tall grass where movement stirred with caution instead of fear. And then he saw her. She stepped forward slowly, one hand lifted slightly in careful balance, posture worn by long travel but not broken by it, dressed in buckskin marked with beadwork that still carried its color despite the dust. Clinging to everything else, her braids fell heavy over her shoulders, and her eyes held a guarded steadiness shaped by loss rather than weakness. The dog moved between them as if binding two separate lives together, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. She spoke first in a low, tired voice, saying she had followed the dog for 2 days because it would not leave her side, and that she had nowhere else to go. Ethan did not reach for his weapon, though habit tugged at his muscles, because something in her stance told him she was not here to take, only to survive. He studied her with the careful measure of a man who had learned that danger and desperation often wore similar faces, and instead of demanding answers, he stepped aside and widened the doorway, not as a promise but as an opening. The dog crossed the threshold without hesitation, tail lifting just slightly as if in quiet triumph, and after a brief pause the woman followed, carrying with her the scent of distance and endurance. Inside the shack, the silence changed shape. It no longer felt empty but uncertain, the kind that comes with another heartbeat in the room. Ethan poured water into a tin cup and placed it within her reach without ceremony, and she drank with restraint, the faint tremor in her hand revealing how long it had been since she trusted shelter. No names were exchanged, no histories demanded, because both of them carried the kind of past that resisted easy telling. The dog settled near the doorway, with the quiet watchfulness of something that had already nearly been lost once. As evening settled in, the woman remained seated near the wall, eyes moving carefully through the small space as if measuring it for safety, while Ethan moved through familiar motions with unfamiliar awareness, conscious of each footstep, each sound, each breath that was no longer his alone. He noticed how thin her wrists were beneath the fringe of her sleeves, how exhaustion pulled at her posture, even when she tried to sit upright. And something inside him shifted, not with pity, but with recognition. He understood too well what it meant to live past the moment when everything had already been taken. When darkness gathered beyond the small window, the world outside returned to being what it had always been: vast, silent and indifferent. But inside the shack, something fragile took shape that neither of them could yet name. The dog lifted its head once, listening to the distant world, then lowered it again as if satisfied for now. Ethan stood near the doorway with his back to the wall, watching both of them, realizing with unsettling clarity that what had returned to him that morning was not just a companion he had mourned, but the beginning of a story he had not asked for but could no longer pretend to resist. He did not yet know who the woman truly was, what she carried with her beyond dust and weariness, or what this unexpected crossing of paths would demand from either of them. But as the night deepened, and the quiet settled around 3 shared breaths instead of one, Ethan understood that the loss he had accepted as final had returned, altered and carrying another life with it. And whatever the cost of that return would be, his days of facing the world alone had already ended. The days that followed unfolded with quiet caution, not with sudden trust or bold promises, but with the slow rhythm of 2 people learning how to exist in the same space without fear. Ethan did not ask her to leave, and she did not ask to stay. They simply shared the hours as they came, dividing the work without spoken agreement. She helped gather water, repaired worn cloth with careful hands, and learned the patterns of the land around the shack, while Ethan found himself adjusting his routines without resistance, as if the world had quietly rewritten the shape of his solitude. The dog remained close to both of them, moving between porch and doorway as if guarding a fragile peace that neither yet dared to name. It was on the 4th evening that danger returned, carried on the sound of hooves and the dust of approaching riders. Ethan saw them first and felt the old instinct tighten in his chest, the same instinct that had once taught him survival at the cost of everything else. The woman saw the change in his posture and understood without question. She did not run, nor did she hide. Instead, she stood beside him, silent and steady, a rifle placed in her hands as naturally as if fate itself had planned the moment. When the riders closed in with false smiles and searching eyes, lies fell easily from their mouths, but truth lived in the woman's unflinching stare. The dog broke the tension, first with a sudden charge that scattered their confidence, and in the chaos that followed, the land once again chose who would remain standing. When the dust finally settled, the riders were gone and the shack still stood, marked once more by the cost of survival. That night, beneath a sky heavy with unspoken meanings, the woman finally spoke her name. Ethan gave his in return. It was not a promise, but it was something close to it, an acknowledgement that they no longer stood alone on separate paths. Time moved forward after that encounter with a gentleness neither of them had expected. The woman no longer carried herself like a guest waiting to be turned away, and Ethan no longer moved as a man waiting to lose what remained. Shared meals became routine. Quiet laughter found its way into the space where silence once ruled. The dog rested at the center of it all, the living thread that had stitched 2 broken lives together. When the season shifted and the wind carried the warning of change, Ethan and the woman stood side by side at the edge of the porch, watching the land stretch outward as it always had. Yet it no longer looked endless in the way loneliness once had. What had been lost to both of them had not returned in its original form, but something stronger had taken its place. Chance chosen rather than remembered. The dog settled at their feet, content at last, and in that quiet moment, Ethan understood that what returned to him was not just a companion he had mourned, nor a stranger seeking shelter, but the simple truth that even after everything is taken, the world sometimes gives back more than it ever promised.